Leap is a 2016/2017 French animated movie that is another case of me being way off about what I originally thought of it. Granted, this movie is still better than Brave and the Boss Baby, because those two ended up being way worse than I remember/thought them being. While for Leap, it's about the same as I originally thought it was, but wow, this movie has a lot more problems looking back. So, what is this movie about? Well, remember the plot synopsis that I gave out during my review on Rock Dog? Well, that's the best description that I have for this movie. Except instead of rock and roll, this girl named Felicie dreams of becoming a dancer. But oh no! Everyone around her says that she's not good enough and she can't become a dancer. But she doesn't give up and tries to pursue that dream no matter what. One night, she and another character named Victor escape from their extremely strict orphanage to go to Paris to try to make both of their dreams become a reality. But through a misunderstanding, Felicie takes a dance class and is trained by a woman who used to be a dancer who is named Odette. Now, back in 2017 when I first watched this movie, my first and only impression of the film, yes, I watched most of these films only once, was that the film was just meh. Not great, but I thought that there were worse animated films from that year, given how bland and generic it is. But back then, I thought that Rock Dog and Boss Baby were worse because they were terribly written and boring on top of being generic. My thoughts on this film right now, while I don't think that this movie is as bad as The Boss Baby, because that movie is written much worse, as well as having gross content in it, this movie, to be honest, is much worse than Rock Dog, for a very similar reason as to why I find something like Ollie's Pack to be much worse than, say, Alvin and the Chipmunks 2015, because Rock Dog is just bland and boring. Leap is absolutely irritating, with problems that are so big that I noticed them when I first watched this movie, and even more problems when I rewatched it for this review. But before I get into what I really dislike about this film, there are 3 positives about this movie that do bring it up a little bit, to make this movie a little more tolerable than something like Brave, Monster Family, and Lewis and the Aliens. For starters, unlike Rock Dog and The Boss Baby, this movie is competently written, meaning that things happen. The biggest problem that I had with both Rock Dog and The Boss Baby was that they generally felt like they couldn't properly fill in their runtime, and rather than filling in the blanks to make them feel finished in like an actual movie, they added what the first SpongeBob movie described as stalling. Leap at least has a coherent narrative to it. There's no stalling for time. We get to see the training that Odette does with Felicie. There's no dumb shenanigans with characters goofing around to pad out the film's runtime. And while the film does have the typical Act 2 breakup, misunderstanding, and liar reveal, this movie at least feels finished. And this movie does give Felicie a backstory at the very least, as it's revealed that her mother was also a dancer. Felicie is still not an interesting character for reasons I'll get to later, but that is somewhat of an improvement from Bodhi. And I also like how this dance teacher is understanding towards Felicie, and along with Odette, he treats her the best out of all the characters in this film. Though that's not saying much. He is still upset that Felicie lied about her being Camille, but he at least doesn't kick Felicie out of the competition because she lied, as opposed to other films that do the liar reveal trope. But that's pretty much it for positives. For starters, this movie does get pretty unlikable at times, and combined with the fact that this film has an irritating feeling to it, it just makes this movie not fun to sit through. I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's flat out mean-spirited. I mean, no other film I will review in the future is ever gonna come close to how draining that Brave and Monster Family are to watch, except for Ivan the Incredible. But that is something to really note about this film. Because this film has a very sour feeling to it, it also makes this movie absolutely obnoxious to sit through, while also not being entertaining in the slightest. You know, Felicie is way too patient for her own good in this movie, and if there's anything that could legitimately push my patience to the limit, it's when people decide to interrupt me before I can finish what I'm about to say, assume intent in me and call me a liar when they don't know anything about me, and when someone decides to touch something of mine with the intention to destroy it. All 3 of these things happened in this movie for the record, and yes, it's about as irritating and anger-inducing as you'd expect. Admittedly, these things only happen at the beginning of the film, but some of the more irritating content is only part of the already noticeable issues with this movie. movie. As that also comes in with the fact that this film is not only incredibly generic, but this movie also might have unintentionally taken elements from Rock Dog without them even noticing it. Fun fact, during my review on Rock Dog, I was originally going to bring up the fact that the film was taking a subplot from Sing, which came out 2 months prior and barely disguising it, but in my research, Rock Dog came out in its home country before Sing was even released, so that's just chalked up to being a coincidence. In this case though, it's the exact opposite. The film came out in its home country in December 2016, months after Rock Dog came out in its home country, and same thing happened when both films were eventually released in theaters in the United States. Now, I'm not under the impression that both films meant to copy each other. It very well may be that this kind of trope has been used several times, and probably with the same problem too, as both Rock Dog and Leap have the issue where its main characters aren't interesting in the slightest, and are only characterized through what they're interested in. And yeah, that's the other issue that I have with this film. Felicie is not an interesting character in the slightest. In fact, like Bodhi, all Felicie is in this movie is dancing, and that's all that she is. To the point where I'd go as far as to say that she's just a Rule 63 Bodhi, except instead of rock and roll, it's dancing. Congratulations, movie! You changed the gender and dream that said character wants to pursue. But that doesn't mean that their character is any different. They're just as bland and one-dimensional as the other. With the only difference being that Felicie has a backstory, but that backstory is so brief and vague that it barely does anything to make her interesting. Like I said with Rock Dog as well as Middle School Muggles and Thundercats Roar, a dream or power that a character has does not make them a character. The personalities and struggles they go through is what makes them a character. And Felicie is not an interesting character. Do you want to know what makes Shantae from the Shantae franchise a great character? Beyond the fact that design and voice-wise, she's absolutely wonderful, she has an actual character to her. Her character isn't just, I'm a dancer, or I want to be a dancer. She's kind, does make mistakes like most characters do, and even has a bit of a feisty and impatient side from time to time. Though, it's a shame that she doesn't have an animated series, because that would be interesting to check out sometime in the future. But, back to Leap real quick. Another issue that I have with this movie is that even though, yes, this movie is more competently written than Rock Dog and Boss Baby, that doesn't mean that this movie is not poorly written. Because yeah, Leap has writing issues that are so obvious that I noticed them on my first viewing, and when watching the film again to write this script, these issues are even more obvious now. For starters, the film is over-reliant on plot conveniences and characters acting stupid out of character to further the plot. Like, as soon as Camille breaks something that Felicie held near and dear to her heart, the mailman comes and gives an invitation to the dance school, though if I was in Felicie's position, I would probably pretend to be Camille too, basically to spite this little brat. Because Felicie had this music box with her for years, since she was a baby. And when Felicie returns to Paris near the conclusion, Camille attempts to break the music box again! And after everything that this movie showed its audience, I don't buy that Felicie would easily be persuaded by a random boy that she met not too long ago. Given that for most of the movie, she's more concerned about dancing and that's it. Only for that to be changed out of nowhere when a boy named Rudy tells her that she's ready, when no, she really isn't. That's why studying is a thing, so you'd be more prepared for something like this. And this is only thrown into the movie to cause the incredibly generic Act 2 breakup between her and Victor, causing her to be sent back to the orphanage, only for her to come back anyway.
That was pointless.
Why not just have her do the Act 2 breakup with Victor because she needed to train, and then have her fail the dance presentation because she was stressed out from the previous day, and then have her forced to live on the streets as punishment? That would literally accomplish the exact same thing. Have her get the exact same dream of her mother before she gets excited to dance again. Her being dragged back to the orphanage served no purpose in the story, and all it did was create plot contrivances. And the writing issues that this movie has also apply to the characters as well. This movie has some of the worst character redemptions that I've ever seen in anything animated, not just in movies, but animation in general. These characters that this movie redeems aren't necessarily villains. These aren't the Diamonds from Steven Universe, as this movie only has one antagonist, but the movie doesn't attempt to redeem her. No, I'm talking about characters that are generally nasty, to the point where when the movie all of a sudden wants us to see them as good now, I was actually stunned about when first first watching and then rewatching this movie when these parts came around. For starters, there's Greasy Guard, whom at the beginning of the film treats Victor and especially Felicie in a way that could be described as pushy, aggressive, and hostile. To the point where, when both of them escape on one night to go to Paris, he literally chases them down like a madman who escaped from a mental asylum, and then when we see him again later on in the movie, and I was actually stunned about this when I first watched this movie, he starts off by aggressively saying, "Where is Felicie?" Seriously, what does this guy have against this girl? And then he suddenly switches from being an unhinged lunatic to suddenly feeling sorry for her. And bear in mind, this happens in the same scene. And the movie expects us to just roll with it. No, 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 no! No, movie, you cannot just transition past this. After Greasy Guard was being severely aggressive and pushy, you cannot expect the audience to suddenly believe that he has a change of heart. It's not even a change of heart. I just call it unnatural, forced, bad writing. And get this, the reason why Camille has her change of heart at the last second is because, I have a bad mother. Early on in the movie, she breaks something that isn't even hers and then attempts to break it again near the end before Felicie and Camille show off their dance moves to each other. Those are things that you absolutely cannot recover from. Having a bad parent does not make you do repulsive things to someone you don't know. It just doesn't. Nor does having autism or being nervous about something make you do something to hurt another person. That's not something that should be a get out of jail free card. Yeah. Pacifica Northwest from Gravity Falls and Amity from the Owl House work in this case because the worst things that they've done in their early appearances was act snobby and that's it. Not doing things to hurt other people intentionally. But overall, even though Leap is not the worst animated movie that I've ever seen, I mean, I'd still take this movie over something like The Boss Baby because that movie throws in a lot of gross out. I'd easily take Rock Dog over this movie because that movie is just boring while Leap is very irritating. Then again, that's not saying much. Because back then, I originally thought that it was just kind of bland and forgettable, and rewatching it for this review, it's still like this, although I felt that I was a bit too nice towards it. But hey, opinions do change over time, and I have a feeling that there will be some more upcoming animated movies for Sean's yearly reviews that will have this exact same issue, but only time will tell.
Everything